in the course of people's involvement with others in the ordinary business of life. And what he has in mind is the kind of practical know-how that we associated with skill. And think of the technique involved in tying shoelaces or breaking an egg or doing the ironing. Skills such as these are developed not through formal instruction, but through the repeated and often wordless performance of tasks involving specific postures and gestures, or what Bourdieu calls a particular body hexis. He says, a way of walking, a tilt of the head, facial expressions, ways of sitting and using implements, all of these and more comprise what it takes to be an accomplished practitioner, and together they furnish a person with his or her orientations in the world. Now, one way of saying this would be to say that these skills and orientations are embodied. But that's not to suggest, as do many writers in social and cultural theory, that the human body should be understood as a kind of vessel into which social and cultural content can be poured, or a surface upon which it can be inscribed. Such a view would be mistaken on two counts. Firstly, it would render the body passive and inert, and secondly, its movements would be reduced to mere signs directing our attention to what they stand for. That is, attitudes, beliefs, or mental states that somehow float above the road we tread in real life. The point is rather that in treading this road, in our movement along a particular way of life, the body undergoes processes of growth and decay, and concomitantly, particular skills, habits, capacities and strengths, as well as abilities and weaknesses, are enfolded in its very constitution, in its neurology, its musculature, even in its anatomy. Or to adopt a distinction suggested by the social historian Paul Connaughton, this is the matter of incorporation rather than inscription. Cello playing, for example, could be said to be embodied in the sense of being developmentally incorporated through practice and training in an environment. And the same in principle should go for every other practical skill. But having arrived at this point, I can see no further justification for upholding a distinction between the body and the organism. Surely the body, with its powers of autonomous movement, active and alive to the world, surely the body is the organism. But so for that matter is the mind. Indeed, one could just as well speak of enmindment as of embodiment, because to develop certain patterns of movement in the world is at one and the same time to develop certain modalities of attending to it. If mind, as Gregory Bateson so passionately argued, if mind is not limited by the skin, but rather extends outward into the environment along multiple pathways of sensory involvement, so likewise the body is not a static, self-contained entity, but is given in movement, undergoing continual growth and development along the lines of its manifold environmental relationships. So body and mind are not two separate things, but two ways of describing the same thing, or better the same process, namely the activity of the organism person in his or her environment. And these observations offer a new resolution to one of the oldest of anthropological conundrums. Take two people from different backgrounds and place them in the same situation. They will differ in what they make of it. Why? Cognitive anthropologists would respond that it's because they're handling the same input of sensory data in terms of dissimilar cultural models or representational schemas. But the theory of practice suggests an alternative answer. Our two characters perceive their surroundings differently because they have been trained through previous experience of carrying out diverse practical tasks involving particular bodily movements and sensitivities, to orient themselves in relation to the environment and to attend to its features in different ways. The difference, in other words, lies not in the way in which people represent the environment inside their heads, but in the ways they discover what it affords for their activities. And crucially, this implies that how people perceive will depend upon how they move. Over 50 years ago, one of the pioneers in the study of human movement, the Russian scientist Nikolai Bernstein, drew this conclusion from a study of blacksmiths at work. He found that while the trajectory of the tip of the skilled blacksmith's hammer in repeated blows on the anvil was remarkably consistent. So he always brought the tip down at exactly the right place. The trajectory of his limbs was never precisely the same from one blow to the next. How can it be, Bernstein asked, that the motion of the hammer, rather than that of the limbs, is reliably replicated in each blow, when it's only by way of the limbs that the hammer is made to move? The smith's movements, he reasoned, cannot be the output of a fixed motor program. Rather, the secret of dexterity must lie in the continual adjustment or tuning of movement in response to an ongoing perceptual monitoring of the emergent task. In short, the smith watches and feels as he works. Now, from this there follows an implication of capital importance. Neither blacksmithing, nor cello playing, nor any other kind of skills practice can be reduced to the mechanical application of a fixed motor program or formula. Hence, also, it cannot be through the replication of such formulae that skills are passed from generation to generation. Traditional models of social learning, as we've seen, separate the intergenerational transmission of information, specifying particular techniques, from the application of this information in practice. First, a model or generative schema is established in the novice's mind from observations of the movements of already accomplished practitioners. Secondly, the novice imitates these movements by running off exemplars of the technique in question from the schema. Now, I don't deny that the learning of skills involves both observation and imitation. But observation is no more a matter of forming internal mental representations of observed behavior than is imitation a matter of converting these representations into manifest practice. Because the novice's observation of accomplished practitioners is not detached from, but grounded in, his own perceptual engagement with his surroundings. And the key to imitation lies in the intimate coordination of the movement of the novice's attention to others with his own bodily movement in the world. And that's what's meant colloquially by getting the feel of things. And it's this too that marks the progression from clumsiness to dexterity. The clumsy practitioner is precisely one who implements mechanically a sequence of received instructions while remaining insensitive to the evolving conditions of the task as it unfolds. And conversely, to have a feel for something means moving in a way that is continually and subtly responsive to the nuances of one's relations with relevant aspects of the environment. To achieve such fluency of performance, it's not enough to observe. One has to undertake repeated trials. The budding cellist has to practice. You give me 3 minutes. But in these trials, it's the task rather than the precise trajectory of movement that is repeated. The novice or apprentice engaged in such trials is not acquiring culture as though it could simply be downloaded into his head from a superior source in society, but is rather embarking on a process that anthropologist Jean Lave has called understanding in practice. And our conclusion that such understanding calls for a fine-tuning of skills of action and perception through repeated trials within an environment is fully consistent not only with the ecological approach in psychology, but also with a biological focus on the generative dynamics of developmental systems. Now, just to conclude, I want to return to the claim of Clifford Geertz, which I cited at the outset, that while all humans come into the world with the natural equipment to live any kind of life, in the end they live only one. Human life in this view is conceived as a movement from the universal to the particular, or from biology to culture, entailing a gradual filling up of capacities and a closing down of possibilities. I can only conclude that such a view is fundamentally mistaken. The fact is that our bodily equipment, if we can call it that, is not ready-made, but undergoes continual formation in the course of our lives. Even the skeleton, for example, grows in a